friends, and welcome back to Cooking with Mr. Jeff. Today we are celebrating Pie Day, and what better way to do that than to make a fresh pie from scratch. Today we're going to be making America's favorite pie, that is apple pie. So I've already peeled my apples, but the first thing we're going to do is make a crust. So if you are not making your crust from scratch, you can buy this at the store, just pastry crust. But this is really easy. I'm going to be using a food processor today, but if you don't have one, you can easily do this without, and I'll tell you how when we get started. So let's dive right in. The first thing we need is flour. We need 2.5 cups all-purpose flour, or 300 grams. So I've got this on a little scale because I'm feeling fancy. We want 300 grams of flour, or 2.5 cups. Okay, we've got 2.5 cups flour in there. We need a 1/4 cup granulated sugar, or if you're using a scale, that should be 50 grams. We need a 1/4 teaspoon salt, just about 1 gram. And now we're ready to throw this on our food processor. First thing we're gonna do is just mix this up, then we're gonna start adding cold butter. So if you don't have a food processor, my recommendation would be to freeze your butter and then use a cheese grater. And we're gonna grate in a cup of butter into this mixture. So let's move over to our food processor. Okay, just to stir up our dry ingredients, quick pulse. All I'm going to do now is cut up my butter into smaller pieces so that it's easier to break down in the food processor. Or if you're freezing your butter, this is when you would grate it in by hand. I'm just spreading these around in my food processor so that they don't clump up while we're processing. And pulse a few times. This looks perfect. You want to be able to see chunks of butter. It shouldn't be totally powdered. Now we're going to add in about 6 tablespoons of ice cold water. This isn't gonna thicken up quite yet. We're gonna add it slowly while we're pulsing, and then that's really gonna bring this all together. So what it should look like is just about like this when we're ready, because when you pick it up and squeeze it, we have dough. So I'm just gonna dump this totally out on my pastry mat here. And you should be able to bring it right into a ball. Easy, we have homemade pastry crust. So what I like to do here is use my pastry mat. You could do this on wax paper. It's just kind of bring it all in together here. So we collect. We don't really need to knead the dough, but we need to make sure it all comes together so we can make like a disc and then wrap that in cling wrap and store it in the fridge for about an hour. Okay friends, I know I just said cling wrap, but it turns out I don't have any. So we're gonna use wax paper. Cling wrap is better, but wax paper will work just fine. I'm gonna make sure this is nice and tight and pop this into our fridge. We want to make sure it's pretty sealed so that it doesn't dry out and get exposed to any elements in the refrigerator. You could leave this overnight, but at least an hour, friends. So for my pie, I'm going to need 2 of those crusts, so I'm just going to do the same exact thing again. Okay, we have both of our pie crust cooling in the fridge and kind of letting all that moisture evenly distribute so they'll be easier to roll out. We're gonna let those rest for a while, and in a little bit, we'll get started on our pie filling. Okay, our pie crusts have been hanging out for a little while. I'm gonna start prepping the apple pie filling. So the first thing we're gonna do is peel our apples. I've already done that work, and then we're going to core them and chop them at the same time. So I do this super simple. I just cut away from the core of the apple. And if you want to get every little thing, you can get these pieces in here. I'm gonna leave most of those. Then I'm gonna give these a rough chop so that they're into little cubes. And we're gonna toss these right into a bowl. Continue doing this until all of your apples are chopped. You want about 3 pounds of apples for a 9-inch pie dish. I'm using a little bigger pie dish, so I'm gonna be chopping more apples. I don't think I mentioned before, I'm using gala apples, but you can use any kind you like. My mother always used green apples, like Granny Smith in her pie, to cut the sweetness, but we're going to be adding some other things to give ours a bit of a zing. Okay, I've got 2 apples left, but I think I'm happy with this. It's always better to have more than you need, because if you have extra pie filling, you can save that for ice cream toppings. You can make tarts with that. You can add it to breakfast food. It's really, really delicious. Now I'm going to toss my chopped apples with lemon juice. We want about 1/4 cup. I'm going to be squeezing mine fresh. You can buy this from the store. The smell of fresh squeezed lemon juice always reminds me of the state fair. I always used to go and hit up the lemonade stands. So 1 lemon gave me 1/4 cup. I'm going to toss this my apples, and again, this is going to give this a zing to kind of counteract super sweetness. It's a lot of apples in this bowl. I might add a little more lemon juice. Since I almost doubled the amount of apples I need, I just added another 1/2 lemon. Don't want to make it too zingy, too sour. Now we're going to add 2/3 cup sugar to toss in with this as well. To our stove top. We're going to start by melting 1/4 cup of butter in our saucepan. Okay, our butter is completely melted. We're going to add our apples right into here. Slowly. Now we're going to saute these for about 2 minutes until the sugar completely dissolves. Then we're going to add a few things. Okay, it's been about 2 minutes. I can tell my sugar has melted down. I'm pretty happy with how this is looking. This is where I'm going to add in some cinnamon, just a pinch of nutmeg, and some cornstarch. So the recipe calls for 1/2 teaspoon cinnamon. I added a little more because I used more apples, but 1/2 teaspoon cinnamon, pinch of nutmeg, and a tablespoon cornstarch. Everything is evenly combined. I'm going to reduce heat, cover, and simmer this about 7 minutes. So now we're on a medium-low, and I'm gonna clean up my mess. Okay, it's been about 7 minutes. My apples have been covered. I've stirred them a few times while they cook. They're softening up pretty nicely. The next thing we're going to do is pour our apples into this strainer so that we can separate the juices from the apple pieces. Ah, this smells amazing right now. Okay, so ever so carefully, I want to strain these out, because what we're going to do is we're going to cook the juices down a little more, cook out a little bit more of the water. We don't want our apples to burn. We just want our juices to thicken up a little bit. Okay. There. I'm gonna add these juices back over here. Now we don't want this to totally caramelize. We just want to cook out some of that excess water. So let it simmer, give it a constant stir, and just let it thicken up a little bit. While that's doing its thing, we can add our apples into that bowl. Because once our juices have cooked down a little bit, we're going to toss everything in here, and we're almost ready. Okay, I'm getting pretty happy with this. You notice it's taking longer to cover its tracks. It's thickening up really nicely. I think this is just about ready to add back to our apple slices. So we're going to combine these, give them a good toss, then we are going to let them cool completely before adding them to our pie crust. Because if we added them right now, it would melt all the butter and it would be a sad story. So I'm actually going to throw these into my fridge where I roll up my pie crust, just let them cool, let them settle. Okay, you want to let your pie crust come back a little bit to room temperature. If you roll it, well, it's too cold, too solid, it's going to crack immediately, and then let's have more work to do. So we always want to roll out onto a generously floured surface. Flour up our rolling pin. This looks perfect. You can still see lots of little chunks of butter in there. It's going to make a really great pastry crust. If you do get some cracks, totally okay. Push them back together, give them some love. Okay, got this rolled out to about 1/4 of an inch thickness. I'm gonna roll it onto my rolling pin. Boop. Let's see how we did. So I like to lift and let it settle into the dish. You don't want to stretch it or pull it. Things will shrink back on you. And you want to trim off any excess, maybe leave about 1 inch of overhang. Hang on to your scraps for now, because we might need them for our lattice work we're going to do on top. Okay, my pie filling has cooled down enough for me to add right in here. Beautiful. Now, if you have more pie filling than you need, again, you can save that. So we're going to set this aside while we roll out our other pie crust. Now what we're going to do is use a pizza cutter to cut our strips for our lettuce. Don't worry if they're not perfectly the same width. Gives it a more rustic look. Let's start assembling and see what happens. Okay, now some of you may have made a lattice before. If you haven't, the easiest way to do this is to fold back every other. And voila! Just like before, we're going to cut off the excess and we're just going to tuck everything underneath to make it nice and neat. The next thing we're going to do is an egg wash. This is optional, but I think it really adds a nice touch. Really gives a beautiful color to the pie. This is going to be 1 egg and a tablespoon cream. We give that a nice beat with a fork, and then we're going to use a brush to make sure we get this on every nook and cranny of this beauty. So I like to start at one edge and work my way across. This is going to be one of those things, if you miss a spot, that it's like if you went tanning, sun tanning, and missed a spot with your suntan lotion, with your sunscreen, that it will really catch the eye. So take your time. The last thing I'm doing before I tend my pie and put it in the oven is I've got some sugar and cinnamon in here. There's some little ramekin that I'm gonna sprinkle all over the top of the pie. So it's about 1/2 teaspoon cinnamon and like 3 tablespoons sugar. I'm just gonna give this a generous sprinkle just to finish it off. If you have never tented a pie before, all you need is some aluminum foil. There are some fancy things you can buy, but this is really all you need. All this is going to do is protect the crust around the edge of the pie so that it doesn't burn, while the middle really has time to cook all the way through. So, oh, I thought I had so much, I'm just a little short. So not fancy, that's all you have to do. Now our pie has been tented to protect that outer crust. We're going to throw it into the oven for 350 degrees for about 40 to 45 minutes. Now I have a tray in my oven just in case this bubbles over at all, so it's ready to catch anything that's going on. And I'll see you in about 40 to 45 minutes after I clean up my mess. Please excuse the loud noise that is my dishwasher. My pie cooked for 45 minutes. Didn't look done yet, so I put it in for another 10. It was looking pretty good, so I removed the tenting, the tin foil around, let it cook for another 10 just to let everything get golden brown, and it looks perfect. Ta-da! Look at this beauty. I'm super happy with this. I'm gonna let this cool before I cut into it, but I hope yours looks as lovely as mine does. All right, our pie has had a chance to cool. Let's give it a taste. It smells so good and it looks so beautiful. I'm so happy. I don't think we're gonna get this out of here and maintain beauty, folks. Okay, my slice didn't come out beautiful, but I can't wait to taste it. Here we go, friends. You're never gonna have another store-bought pie after this one, friends. Thank you so much for joining me, friends. I hope you've had fun. Happy Pie Day, and let me know if you like this recipe. Bye-bye.